Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, I was in a queue for the loo and it moved very slowly. I did tell you, Nelly, I was going to the loo. Yeah. So sorry to keep you all waiting. So I don't know what Nelly told you. Did she tell you anything while I was away? Maybe she did. But anyway, too much. Between 2003 and 2005, I worked in Oxford astrophysics department as an artist in residence. Sorry, I'm trying to get away from the light. And one of the things that I worked a lot on there was radio astronomy. I did, and ended up making a couple of works, which I suppose one would call sculptural observatories, sculptural radio telescopes. And there's an awful lot I'd actually like to talk about, and I can't really think how to start. So what I'd like to do is show you a film of the last work I made there called The Centre of the Universe, and then answer questions. If you haven't got any questions, I'll just tell you the answers anyway, so don't worry, there won't be a void. very much. Do I need this microphone? Is it all right without
Yes, yes.
No. What? No? Do I need this microphone? Any questions?
Yeah, you've got one over there.
Well,
This way.
So the sine wave there was a sonification. Was it a sonification of some data?
Well, I can't get this to work now. It was a working radio telescope. In the centre of the dish there was an antenna made from actually 2 intersecting spirals of copper piping, and that was fed into a
Somehow it's probably because you have too much gamma ray.
I don't know. Something's gone wrong. Probably. Anyway, yeah. So that was fed into a radio receiver, a scanner, and so I could tune it to any particular frequency. And then the output of the radio, was that was just the sonification of whatever it's picking up. But the signal was also fed into the chart recorder, the mechanical pen, and that became a much more interesting thing because I don't know if you noticed, but in the film when you first see the chart recorder, the paper's going around in a loop, and you see the trace drawing over itself continually, and then you see there's a time-lapse bit where it's just falling onto the floor, and the problem was I only had a couple of rolls of paper, and I quickly realised that if I did that, I'd run out after a day, and I was going to be there for 28 days. So I thought, oh well, I'll turn it into loops, to economise the paper. But that was one of those beautiful accidents, because as soon as I turned it into a loop, it became something else entirely. It became, in effect, a kind of drawing machine. And so by tuning the telescope to different frequencies and tweaking the controls of the chart recorder, it would draw in different ways, and by using different nibs of pens and so on and so forth. So it was a sonification, but that wasn't the aim of it. It's a scientific instrument. It wasn't a scientific instrument, it was an art instrument. But it was picking something up. But it was, if you wanted to do serious observation, all you'd have learned is that signals get stronger as the sun gets higher in the sky, and they go down. Again, everyone knows that anyway, so yeah.
Any other question? Yeah.
And what kind of radio waves?
Let's keep it with the microphone. Huh?
Hello? Yeah. What kind of radio waves are you looking at?
Well, I am tuned to different frequencies. So I tune, for example, to 1.4 gigahertz, which means you're listening to hydrogen, in effect. But actually, there's lots of different frequencies you can tune to that you're tuning into different chemicals in the solar system, clouds of gases and so on. And there's frequencies you can tune in to sort of hear meteor showers and so on and so forth. So I tune into different things like that. But actually, I learned from the radio astronomers at Oxford, who I must say were very impressed by my efforts to build the radio telescope, that even if the observations were flaky, that it is actually just a very broadband receiver. It was just sort of picking up everything all the time, really. Hello.
From an astronomer, actually, you've got a question.
Oh, good.
It's actually more of a comment. I think you're doing yourself down by saying that it's just a toy, not a real.
I didn't say it was a toy. It's very serious.
An art instrument. In the 30s or 40s, knowing that there was more radio noise when the sun was in the sky was a fundamental result. Real science, less than a century.
Well, I was 60 years too late, unfortunately, to win the Nobel Prize.
But still, it's up there. Got it within 70 years.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Any question?
There's a question over here. Right on the outskirts.
Could you talk a bit about the audio, how relevant it was and what you were...
How relevant?
Yeah, what actually was it was being played?
Well, like I say, you know, the radio was tuned to a frequency and it was just picking up noise, broadband noise, and actually, you know, if you tune any radio receiver in between channels, you'll get noise, and that, you know, 10% or so of that noise is from the cosmic microwave background, so it's from the beginning of the universe, essentially, from, you know, 100,000 years after the beginning of the universe, or whenever photons started to travel across the cosmos. So, yeah, you know, 10% of it was the beginning of the universe you're listening to, and the rest of it was probably a lot of it's to do with the sun, stuff coming from the sun. But it wasn't really, you know, the point of, I find actually the sound of it was pretty annoying. It was like just, and I find noise like that is pretty, you know, just to listen to it, it doesn't say a lot. So what I discovered was, because I lived in the shed for 4 weeks, and sometimes I had to leave the shed, like to go into town to buy food or whatever. And what I discovered was, when I went out shopping, I would turn the sound system up as loud as it would possibly go, and I'd shut the door of the shed, and the shed literally started to shake. And then I thought, now this is getting interesting, because, you know, I've been to actually, around that time I went to a lot of, I didn't actually, I went to one talk. Bit exaggerated sometimes. I went to one talk at the Royal Society or somewhere, and it was a couple of people from Cambridge, astronomers, who were talking about sounds of the universe, and they were playing, you know, examples of this is what a star sounds like, you know, the spherical harmonics of a star sound like this, and a pulsar sounds like that. But they were playing them on such small sound system, like tiny little speakers. Like you could barely hear them, and then they'd talk over them anyway. And I thought, well, you know, you're talking about the most massive, incomprehensible energies here. You know, really you need the biggest, like, heavy metal sound system. And to really play these things so that people's ears are bleeding and they're lying on the floor screaming to stop. So, you know, I kind of remembered that when I shut the door of the shed, and it actually, then this sound, it wasn't just sort of boring noise, it was actually, it had a sort of primal feel to it. And so that sound then became physical, it became a sort of energy, and that's when I think it became relevant.
Any other question?
Question here?
Yeah, could you say something about the helter-skelter or spiral shape?
Oh, the helter-skelter, yes, I'd love to. Well, that's actually one of the things I was very aware of, because quite early on, when I was working in this residency, I had to somehow find my way into the department, so I went around talking to people in their offices. If their doors were open, I'd knock on it. And I became friends with this man called Steve Rawlings, who's a radio astronomer. I just said to him, it must be, do you think anyone could build a radio telescope? He said, no, you couldn't do it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to build a radio telescope. And then I thought, well, I have to be very careful it just doesn't become a sort of demonstration of science project. So I was kind of looking for a way to get beyond just making a radio telescope. And one thing I was very interested in there too, I'd go browsing around their library and just pull books off the shelves. And I had this book called Ancient Observatories, you know, so it was all about pyramids, stone circles and so on and so forth. And of course ziggurats figured in that, you know, like spiral towers in the deserts of the Middle East. And then I started thinking about the Tower of Babel, and thinking about, you know, these structures as the first efforts of human beings to get into space, not to project themselves into space, but literally to walk up into space. So, you know, you've got Jacob's Ladder, you've got the Tower of Babylon, and then in the last 50 years, the space elevator. You know, it's all part of the same continuum. And so that's really interesting. And I like this idea, also the Tower of Babylon, about the connotations of communication. So the story of the Tower of Babylon, Tower of Babel, is about the fracture of language and the difficulty of people understanding each other. So when I started thinking then, okay, I'm going to make this dish, I'm going to make a contemporary dish, but it'd be interesting to marry it with an ancient kind of base. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to put a sort of spiral tower with a contemporary dish on top. And as soon as I did that, it suddenly made all these ideas. It was like making a circuit, and it was really exciting. It was like the key sort of thing. So this kind of mind map is like a lot of is a way of just sort of trying to keep in my head all the things I was sort of thinking about. So the spiral is also very interesting because it occurs on all scales, you know, so it occurs in DNA and so on, and it occurs right up to the structure of galaxies. Actually, I suggested to some of the cosmologists that possibly the universe itself was of spiral form. They were rather disparaging about that, but I expect to be proved right at some stage on that one. So the spiral, you know, forms many functions in it, but actually the whole thing about language became a very big part of it. So it was interesting to me, this signal that was being drawn out by a pen was like it was like a ghost hand writing something unintelligible, but actually in that there is information. If you know how to crack the information out, if you know the maths, you could get the information. So, you know, the whole thing about the observatory and observing and its physical form became about, you know, language, communication and so on. And something you didn't really see in the film was I had all the letters that spell the centre of the universe. I sort of bought old sign letters because at the time I was trying to read, well I read Finnegan's Wake, and I don't know any of you have read Finnegan's Wake. There's a lot in that. Actually the very form of the words in Finnegan's Wake are like words formed from the rubble of the Tower of Babylon. They're like words from different languages all compressed and crunched together into new words and forms. And there's a wonderful passage in Finnegan's Wake where recurring throughout the book, there's a hen that goes to a dump and tries to pick a letter out of it, like literally a letter that's been written. And eventually you get to sort of hear the contents of this letter, and then Joyce starts to write about all the individual letters, like A, B, C, D and stuff. And, you know, in a sense, talking about them like they're the sort of atoms from which, you know, words being the sort of molecules are formed. And I became very interested in this whole thing of language in that sense too, connected to this spiral form. And every day I arranged the letters in different ways. So sometimes they were literally just a big mess that made no sense, and sometimes I made up new words and so on and so forth. Does that answer the question? Okay. The lady at the front.
Just one more, and then
There's
we.
2 more here.
I can be really quick. I'll speak up fast.
Yes. This sort of feeds into the question I was about to ask anyways, with the spiral and the video. What sort of connection would the spiral possibly have in the looped paper with time and each other?
Well, I think I did sort of answer a lot of that in the last answer. but I'd have to give you the other answer in a different order. But one thing I could say is something about the paper going around. It's like gyres. You know, it's like something going over the same kind of track, but slightly different each time, which in a sense a spiral does. And shall I just answer the lady over here?
Well, when you were out of the room, I added some information that you become an artist in residence at the astrophysics department, am I right, via Jana Levin, professor of astrophysics.
Yeah.
And she had previously been a scientist in residence at the Ruskin, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to check that. Now, recently you said something about maybe a connection between some work that Jana Levin herself was doing on the sounds of space. And I remember hearing that and thinking it was very interesting, but I can't remember it now. And just seeing this film again, I wondered if you could mention it.
Well, my friend and erstwhile colleague in the astrophysics department, Jana Levin, I found her on a TED, one of those TED talks. And she was talking about, it was called Sounds of the Universe. And it was, again, she was doing this thing, she was playing these sounds far too quietly. It was, so I wrote to her suggesting possibly we should collaborate on this big sound system idea of how to present sounds of the universe. Well, I thought it was interesting too, that when I was working at the department, people didn't really take sound as a way of visualizing the cosmos seriously, but obviously now they do.
So do you think you've had an impact?
Very profound. On that note,